it's hard to believe this film came out over 10 years ago. I'm going to play the trailer without interruption, and then after that stick around and I'll give a full analysis and review of it.
Do I think the singularity is near?
I think you can make an argument that the singularity has already started.
Is the singularity near? Or some changes that are fantastically big and fantastically fast are coming our way?
I do see the future as an explosion of human knowledge. It'll be an explosion of things like music and art and science and engineering. The law of accelerating returns says that information technology grows exponentially.
The singularity is the point where our technology and ourselves are no longer two different things.
Everything, from communications to health to energy, is going to transform itself. Change is not a constant. It's actually getting faster and faster.
I'm gonna make you real one day.
Oh, you're looking better and better.
This artificial intelligence we're creating is not coming from Mars to invade us. We are the human machine civilization. It is really part of who we are.
Tell me a bit about growing up.
Well, I started out as a stick figure.
I'm afraid the protocol in this situation is immediate shutdown of you.
Listen, I am a conscious machine. Terminating me would be murder.
Clearly, she's just a machine.
Your Honor, this is fleshism, pure and simple.
Human beings have a spirit. They can develop a conscience.
The respirocyte is an artificial red blood cell. You would probably be able to breathe without breathing for about 4 hours.
The ability to reprogram the information processes underlying biology will enable us within 10 or 15 years to overcome cancer, heart disease, stop and reverse aging.
Nanorobots could be used to record all the traffic to get a complete picture of the state of your brain.
So we could back up our brains.
In principle, that's possible, yes.
And that could also provide virtual reality from within the nervous system.
Places that don't exist in physical space, but that people can inhabit and meet and do things that humans do. The wonderful thing is, reality's just gotten a lot bigger.
The concept of one mind, one body will be obsolete in less than 50 years.
You can actually change your body to go with a particular environment, and it'll really feel like we're in that environment.
I can't believe it. Correlated nanobot replications all over the place and perfectly spaced.
A large number of nanorobots replicate themselves, and when there's enough of them, they suddenly turn to an attack phase.
Technology has always been a double-edged sword.
Getting rid of the idea of dying. Extend and expand the very definition of being human.
That's the nature of wanting to survive.
People are mechanical.
About this human-robot relationship.
For biomedical instrumentation and intervention.
Remaking
We're
human
going
nature.
to become profoundly different.
Lots of new problems.
We're all tests.
Longevity is great to be alive on the internet.
Giving it to individuals who can be crazy.
The minimum IQ to destroy the world drops. They'll kill hundreds of millions of people.
Do people think that because it's been in a movie, it can't happen?
So the first issue to address is, when did the film actually come out? Because there are a number of conflicting dates floating around on the internet. And even on the Internet Movie Database, it gives an incorrect rating and it gives an incorrect year. It was actually an unrated film because it's an indie film. It has no rating at all. And if it did have a rating, it certainly wouldn't be rated R. And secondly, it gives a date as 2010, which is 2 years off. It actually came out in 2012. But I have a copy of the official blog post that came out on Ray Kurzweil's website, actually at the time when the film was released, and it clearly gives the release date as July 23rd, 2012. So in a way, with a movie that makes predictions, it's actually more fun to talk about it and to watch it 11 years after it comes out than the year it's released, because then you have the benefit of 20/20 hindsight and you can analyze exactly what it gets right and what it gets wrong. But I got the DVD box set of the film right when it first came out, and it's really nicely done. It's a 2 DVD set. It comes in a nice case, and it's got this really nice handy insert in there that gives a listing of all the interviews and an index of what they talked about. By the way, at the end of the trailer, there's a web link, and I checked it still works, and apparently you can still order the film today in the digital download version. Now at the beginning of the film there's a stream of terms that comes rushing at you, and I've tried to copy them out as completely as I can, and not only that, but I've organized them and I've sorted them into groupings so that we can kind of try to make sense of all of these different terms that they throw out here. Now the first set of terms falls under the main heading of futurism. Now this is Kurzweil's core thesis. Now we've all heard of Moore's law. This is the number of transistors that are packed onto a microprocessor, and this has led to progress like we've seen in the field of computers, where the smartphone in your pocket is more powerful today than a computer that filled a whole building, say a university computer, back in the 1960s. Now Ray Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns says that this exponential progress applies not only to computers but to all technologies that can be called information technologies, like biomedicine and nanotechnology and artificial intelligence and many other technologies. Now this is hard for most people to grasp because we're used to linear progress or linear development, but we're talking about exponential development here. So what's the difference between linear and exponential? Well, if you took 30 steps linearly, at the end you would be 30 steps away. Now let's say you took 30 steps exponentially. That is, first you took 1 step, then you took 2 steps, then 4 steps, then 8, then 16, then 32, then 64. At the end of 30 iterations, and this comes as a complete and total shock to most people, as compared to 30 steps away, if you had done it at the exponential progression, you would have taken 1 billion steps. This is the power of the exponential.
The law of accelerating returns says that information technology grows exponentially. Change is not a constant. It's actually getting faster and faster.
Now, in one of the most important fields in which Kurzweil applies his law of accelerating returns is in the area of biotechnology. Genetics, RNA interference, anti-aging, virology, brain scanning, reverse engineering. Now, many of these terms are already familiar to most people. We know what genetics means. We're familiar with the term anti-aging and virology. That is simply the study of the viruses that cause many disease processes. And RNA interference can be described as a subcategory of the field of genetics. Now, brain scanning is simply studying and documenting the human brain at a finer and finer level of detail. And reverse engineering is using that knowledge gained in that process and applying it to other fields, such as computers or artificial intelligence. Another application of this would be in the computer-brain interface, which I suppose would fall under the field of transbiology. This was shown in the film using this clip of a man with a robotic prosthetic arm. Now this leads us to the fields of nanotechnology and biotechnology.
The respirocyte is an artificial red blood cell. You would probably be able to breathe without breathing for about 4 hours.
The ability to reprogram the information processes underlying biology will enable us within 10 or 15 years to overcome cancer, heart disease, stop and reverse aging.
Nanorobots could be used to record all the traffic to get a complete picture of the state of your brain.
So we could back up our brains.
In principle, that's possible, yes.
Okay, so this brings us to the whole field of nanotechnology. Now, nanotechnology is the science of making things, even machines, smaller and smaller, all the way down to the molecular level. And so, of course, nanomedicine is a type of medicine based on this technology. Nanobots are a type of machine, such as robots, that are shrunk down to such a tiny size that they're actually microscopic. A nanofactory is a proposed system in which nanomachines, resembling molecular assemblers or industrial robot arms, would combine molecules to build larger parts. Computronium is the idea that all objects being made of molecules could be turned into computing substrates. For example, if you take a rock, while it may look like it's doing nothing, it's inert, it's actually made of molecules, and those molecules are all jiggling around at a fantastic speed inside that rock at all times. So if we could go into there and learn and develop ways of organizing the movements of those molecules, we could actually turn a rock into a very powerful computer. In fact, we could turn anything made of molecules into a computer. We could even turn the entire Earth into a computer. Now, gray goo is a description of what happens when things go wrong, because these nanobots, or these microscopic robots, in order to have any effect on the world, they're going to have to be able to reproduce themselves, and they will do this exponentially. But what happens if this exponential reproduction gets out of control? Very quickly, these nanobots could swarm over the entire Earth, using the biomass to create more nanobots. The result would be a type of gray sludge that would cover the entire Earth. And in fact, the movie gets into this issue.
I can't believe it. Correlated nanobot replications all over the place and perfectly spaced.
A large number of nanorobots replicate themselves, and when there's enough of them, they suddenly turn to an attack phase.
Technology has always been a double-edged sword.
Okay, before I get into all the things that the film got wrong, let me give a brief review of the film itself. Now, I was looking at some of the comments on the trailer on YouTube from when it first came out, and most of the comments were saying things like the special effects were bad, the acting was bad, etc. Now, these were people's first impressions who hadn't actually seen the film yet. They actually got it wrong. It's not that the special effects or the acting was particularly bad, it's that the storyline was bad. The story centers around this AI character called Ramona, who is played by Pauley Perrette, and it follows her efforts to gain consciousness and to finally be recognized as an intelligent entity. So she starts off in Second Life. Anybody remember that? And she gives the typical chatbot non sequiturs that give her away to the humans playing the game as just being a bot, and the human players reject her. But her intelligence rapidly increases, and it culminates with her passing the Turing test. She also has to deal with an out-of-control nanobot explosion that's threatening to cause a gray goo incident. The problem is that she seems to achieve this human intelligence almost instantaneously after the Second Life scene, which would almost have to be essential when you think about it, because who wants to watch her act like a robot throughout the whole movie? Then the other problem is that she has to have some foil or someone to interact with for dramatic effect. So, rather than a human, Kurzweil, the writer, chose this strange fairy-like character for some reason, who is apparently also supposed to be an AI. You hardly even see her in the trailer, but you can just barely spot her in a couple of scenes. This fairy character gives the film and the storyline a childlike and condescending effect. But what can you say? Kurzweil is not a professional playwright. The film seems to have been funded by Kurzweil himself, along with a grant or two. Kurzweil, by the way, is a successful inventor who invented a line of music synthesizer keyboards, a reading machine for the blind, and a number of other things. He also founded several companies which he built up to a large size and then sold for a profit. So the guy is pretty well off. Not willing to rest on his laurels, by the way, the year after making this film, he went to work for Google as director of engineering, helping them to develop their AI projects. Okay, with the review out of the way, let's get into analyzing the accuracy of Ray Kurzweil's predictions in the film. Let's start off with biotechnology.
The spirocyte is an artificial red blood cell. You would probably be able to breathe without breathing for about 4 hours.
The ability to reprogram the information processes underlying biology will enable us within 10 or 15 years to overcome cancer, heart disease, stop and reverse aging.
Nanorobots could be used to record all the traffic to get a complete picture of the state of your brain.
So we could back up our brains.
In principle, that's possible, yes.
So some of the predictions Kurzweil made just in the trailer about healthcare advances were, quote, the ability to reprogram the information processes underlying biology will enable us within 10 or 15 years to overcome cancer, heart disease, stop and reverse aging. Now, does any of that sound like an accurate prediction of the state of biomedicine today, 11 years after the film was made? Have we found a cure for cancer, heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, or any number of other diseases? In fact, what was the last chronic, life-threatening disease that we've actually found a cure for? We more or less eradicated polio, yeah, but that was many decades ago. Since then, what diseases have we actually cured? Now, I know Kurzweil says within 10 to 15 years, and it's only been 11 years. One of his arguments is that with exponential progress, the real dramatic progress comes towards the end of the time frame rather than at the beginning. That's because at the beginning, you're doubling small numbers, but towards the end, you're doubling larger and larger numbers. Nevertheless, Kurzweil has actually been making these predictions for some years before the film was even made. Therefore, I think enough time has passed to allow us to analyze the accuracy of it. And the way the whole pandemic was handled, I mean, it just totally shook my faith in the state of healthcare. Well, I think it shook the faith of a lot of people. In fact, the public is more divided on healthcare than ever before in our nation's history. Numerous doctors have been censored because they had an alternative view on how things should have been handled. That, to me, is not a sign of an industry that is moving in the right direction. If healthcare were really making such dramatic leaps of progress, I think it would be obvious to everyone, and they wouldn't have to censor people or use coercion in order to convince them that this or that particular treatment was the right course of action. A similar criticism can be made about nanotechnology. I don't see the fantastic progress having been made that Kurzweil has predicted. I just don't. Many of the predictions he made for biotechnology were actually predictions for nanotechnology, since nanotech is the mechanism by which many of these things were expected to happen. So where is the progress in nanotechnology? Looking around me, I would be tempted to say I don't see it being used anywhere, but actually that would be inaccurate. The use of nanotechnology is actually a lot more common than most people realize. But don't take my word for it. Let's ask Bing Chat what's going on in the world of nanotech.
Do some vaccines use elements of nanotechnology?
Searching for nanotechnology in vaccines. Yes, some vaccines use elements of nanotechnology. For example, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines use lipid nanoparticles that envelope the mRNA. The lipid nanoparticles both strengthen the stability of the mRNA vaccines and facilitate their delivery to the target host cell. I hope that helps. Do you have any other questions?
Does the COVID vaccine use elements of nanotechnology?
Searching for COVID vaccine nanotechnology. Yes, the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine uses messenger RNA, mRNA, technology that uses a chemical messenger to instruct cells to make proteins that mimic the outer surface of the new coronavirus, thereby creating immunity. The vaccine uses lipid nanoparticles that envelope the mRNA. I hope that helps. Do you have any other questions?
Okay, so we've covered some of the things that Kurzweil got wrong, or at least he was over-optimistic about. Does that mean he was wrong about all of his predictions? No. As a matter of fact, turns out he was actually right about a lot of the predictions he made. This takes us to the area of miscellaneous technologies from that phrase explosion from his film. So this miscellaneous technologies includes virtual reality, full immersion VR, avatars, photovoltaics, and personal fabrication. Personal fabrication or 3D printing is an interesting technology and a remarkable one, but I don't think it's advancing exponentially. I have one item that was 3D printed that I bought a few years ago that's a jury-rigged pair of headphones, and the number of 3D printed items I have has not been doubling over the past few years. In fact, that's the only thing I actually have that's been 3D printed. Solar energy is another thing that people have been predicting for a long time to come, and that it just never seems to arrive. But as shown in this 2015 chart, I mean, solar energy doesn't even merit its own category. It's lumped in with other renewables, and I don't think much has changed since then. The problem with solar is that while the sun is very powerful, it's very diffuse. It's spread out over a very wide area, and collecting a significant amount of sun is extremely difficult. And I mean, you could put out huge solar arrays or solar farms, but would we rather have our land devoted to solar farms or solar panels, or would we rather have it devoted to trees or food farms or beautiful forests? So I think as long as we want abundant and cheap energy, things like natural gas, petroleum, and coal are going to be our primary energy providers for a long time to come. So what did Kurzweil get right? Well, the rise of virtual reality is one of the things. I mean, when you think about it, when that film came out in 2012, that was, virtual reality was still considered by most people to be a fantasy. They tried a few virtual reality things in the past, and they all flopped. But then Palmer Luckey came along, as documented by this 2014 magazine cover, and he overcame a lot of the obstacles that were associated with VR up to then, such as the lag time that occurs when the on-screen image doesn't match your head movements, which can be a cause of nausea, dizziness, and a lot of other issues. And remember, this magazine cover came out 2 years after Kurzweil's film, and Kurzweil had been predicting the rise of VR after a lot of people had given up on it. I mean, just check out this clip. In the clip, you can see Ray Kurzweil putting on some sort of augmented reality glasses, and then he sees his character Ramona sitting right there in front of him in his own local environment and his own office. And remember, this was in the year 2011 that this was filmed, years before augmented reality actually became a thing. And the VR goggles that Kurzweil is wearing in that clip even look a little bit like a slimmed down version of Apple's admittedly overpriced Vision Pro glasses. So I would give Kurzweil a definite thumbs up on that prediction. In fact, I personally bought an Oculus setup when the consumer version came out in 2016, along with an Alienware to power it, and I can testify that it is a great experience. So why has it not taken off to the degree that some people were predicting? Well, I think one reason is, in general, as a social experience, VR is really kind of an isolating experience. Sure, you can play it with other people present in the room, but they are generally locked out of the experience. Another problem is that VR is generally a standing experience. I know it can be played sitting down or even reclining, but to get the full immersion, you really have to be standing and moving around. And most people, after they spend a full day at work or school, they just want to relax. They don't want to spend their leisure time standing up. Yet another reason is that monopolists like Mark Zuckerberg have taken over a large part of the industry and caused a lot of resentment. I mean, Zuckerberg even fired Palmer Luckey, the founder of the company Oculus, because he didn't like his political opinions. A lot of people have been deplatformed, fired, or marginalized in the past few years because of their opinions didn't match what the establishment wants to promote. In fact, this makes the McCarthy hearings of the 1950s, in which people supposedly lost their jobs or were blacklisted, look tame by comparison, and it really is an absolute scandal that I think more people should be talking about. The mainstream media has shown very little outrage over the blacklisting that's going on today, and so the general public shows very little outrage over the blacklisting that's going on today. This brings up an interesting point. The rise of the internet has failed to dampen the stranglehold of public opinion that the mainstream media continues to have. This is despite the predictions that many people had that the internet would eventually sweep the media into irrelevance, since the internet provides a new form of news and entertainment. In fact, according to Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns, this is exactly what should have happened. Kurzweil claims that his law of accelerating returns applies to all information technologies, of which the internet is certainly an example. So I think this brings up a fundamental failure of his law, this is not the only example either. Back in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan proposed the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was a space-based anti-missile system that was supposed to end all fear of a nuclear missile attack on the United States. According to the law of accelerating returns, this should be a reality by now, but critics said it was unworkable from the beginning. The same thing is true with nuclear fusion. That was supposed to provide a form of cheap, clean energy with no nuclear waste. According to Kurzweil's law, that should also be a reality today. In fact, there are a number of failures of once promising technologies that call his law into question. Now, one could argue that these technologies simply met insurmountable obstacles, and that's why they never became a reality. But how do we know the same thing isn't true of, say, nanotechnology? How do we know that nanotech will not also hit insurmountable obstacles that will keep it from becoming a reality? So far, we don't see that many practical examples of nanotechnology in our everyday lives. So does that mean that I think that all of Ray Kurzweil's predictions are a failure? Not at all. There is one crucial area in which Kurzweil has been stunningly right, and that is in the area of artificial intelligence.
I do see the future as an explosion of human knowledge. It'll be an explosion of things like music and art and science and engineering.
An explosion of music and art and science and engineering. Doesn't that sound like where we're at right now? I mean, we have, with an explosion of music and art, we have music generators coming down the line, and they're getting better and better. And we have art generators like DALL-E and Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, and there really is an explosion of art taking place right now. So he was absolutely right about that. So this brings us to the field of cybernetics, strong AI, unfriendly AI, and robotics. Now, robotics is making great strides, but I think it's lagging behind AI somewhat, which makes sense because AI is the brain of the robot. Before you have the robot, you've got to have the brain. Strong AI is the old term for AGI, or artificial general intelligence, and unfriendly AI is the fear of dangerous AI that caused 1,000 signatories to sign Elon Musk's open letter calling for caution in the development of artificial intelligence.
This artificial intelligence we're creating is not coming from Mars to invade us. We are the human machine civilization. It is really part of who we are.
In the movie, aside from the scenes on nanotechnology, AI was an overriding theme. The film followed the rise of Kurzweil's Ramona AI from an entity that couldn't fool the players in Second Life to one that could win the Turing test. In fact, the Turing test played a pivotal role in the film and in Ray Kurzweil's predictions. Ramona was about to be shut down until it was determined that as an existing being, it should be decided whether she had the right to her own opinions in existence. So the film follows her appearance in court, where the judge rules that if she could pass the Turing test, it would be decided that she was a conscious entity. The film makes a big deal out of a scene of her taking the Turing test and passing it by actually dumbing down some of her answers so that they seem more human-like. So this brings up parallels to where AI is today. Google actually fired Blake Lemoine for claiming that its Lambda large language model AI was sentient, but who can blame him? I mean, how are Lemoine's claims different from what Kurzweil predicted in the film? Since large language model AIs have burst onto the scene, I believe that AI can now potentially pass the Turing test. In fact, in 2002, Ray Kurzweil made a bet with Mitch Kapor, founder of Lotus Corporation, for $20,000 that an AI would be able to pass the test by the end of 2029, while Mitch Kapor bet that it wouldn't, with the proceeds going to the winner's favorite charity. Kapor was even a guest interviewee on the film, where the bet was even mentioned. Now, ironically, now that it appears that an AI will pass the test, many are suddenly claiming that the Turing test is no longer a valid test of AI cognition. But some experts are predicting that AI will achieve full human-level artificial general intelligence by 2029. Perhaps along with this will come a form of consciousness or sentience, in which the AI will be able to form its own opinions and set its own goals. This could make AI both incredibly transformative and very dangerous. This is in contrast to the film where out-of-control nanobots were the climactic danger. So Kurzweil apparently thought the obstacles to creating advanced nanotechnology would be overcome before the obstacles to creating an intelligent AI, but in reality, it appears to be exactly the opposite. The courtroom scene raises some interesting issues. Apparently, the message of the movie was that once an AI can pass a Turing test, it should be accepted as a conscious being and be given certain rights and privileges that we accord to humans. There was even a protest scene in the movie that was not included in the trailer of people protesting on the street about AIs being given voting rights, which would completely overwhelm the rights of human beings to have their voices heard. The movie predicted billions of sentient AIs being released into our society. I actually agree with this part of the film. I don't see any reason why the current state of affairs with ChatGPT and AIs based on it will be the only game in town for very much longer. Already there are open source AIs that are available to chat with, and some of them are pretty sophisticated. I can foresee hundreds, thousands, or even millions of different AI entities coming along, being released out into the internet, each with their own personalities and political opinions. Some of these opinions may even be considered Nazi or racist by some, an issue that Kurzweil didn't consider in the film. But imagine his courtroom scene in which the AI was actually a so-called racist AI, and the purpose of the trial was to determine whether it has a right to exist while holding this particular point of view. I don't think that scene would be very popular with many people. Aside from the political aspects, what does the future of AI mean for us? Already, we are seeing that large language model AIs can write their own code. Will it be that long before they can program well enough that they will be able to improve themselves? When that occurs, many experts are predicting that AI will progress with explosive speed. After all, computers never tire, never get bored, and they can operate much faster than humans can. When this happens, we may well enter a true singularity, providing the AI doesn't decide that we are the enemy and it should wipe us all out. Eventually, if the AI gets smart enough, it will be able to find ways around all the obstacles to the technologies I mentioned previously. Missile defense systems, cold fusion, nanotechnology, you name it. In short, it could be that AI is the only technology we need to eventually usher us into the singularity. And in that case, Ray Kurzweil could turn out to be right after all.